Service the Northern Virginia area from Washington, D.C. to Virginia to Maryland. The van pool program was implemented with environmental enhancements because we wanted to find a way to improve our recruiting and retaining of employees. So this provided an opportunity for people to be picked up, so they eliminated their driving costs.
We have 40 employees right now, and out of these 40 employees, we have 32 that are production, and out of those, 12 have a need for transportation. We purchased new vans. We issued them to 2 of our drivers, our crew managers. They're responsible to go and get the people, bring them to work, and take them back home.
We have 2 vans that picked up the employees. We have 12 employees coming from Maryland. So now when we have all our people together, it's easy for us. We are servicing the clients faster.
The van pool program has improved the productivity and morale of the staff because it has provided us a means for them to get to work and enable them to reduce their living expenses, which in turn makes them a more reliable employee.
Lumen is an innovative small company that was born at the intersection of DoD and VA health data sharing. We actually did a study of where everyone lived and put an office that was right in the middle of everyone. We're right off the metro. We also pay for metro cards.
Lumen promotes telework opportunities through our job postings. One of the things that we highlight in the job postings is the fact that we offer remote telework opportunities.
At Lumen, we encourage teleworking through our overall work environment and our training process. The onboarding process is entirely web-based. It's all virtual meetings. This allows new employees to get introduced to all of the resources, but they can do it all at home. They're able to engage in virtual reality options that we have for training. We have virtual office tours even, so they're actually able to visit the office without actually visiting the office. We participate in programs such as Bike to Work Day and Montgomery County's Walk to Ride Challenge.
One of the ways that Lumen tries to motivate employees to achieve a high level of success at the company was through our STAR recognition program. The STAR recognition program basically stands for Staff Appreciation and Recognition. And the concept behind it is to recognize staff who has performed very well, meets the company's core values and mission, therefore meeting our objectives and goals. Peers and or managers are able to nominate staff to recognize for that outstanding work or outstanding citizenship.
The District Department of Transportation, also known as DDOT, is the state and the local DOT for the District of Columbia. DDOT's mission is to equitably deliver a safe, sustainable, and reliable multimodal transportation network for all residents and visitors of the District of Columbia. GoDC is a complimentary DDOT service to all kinds of different organizations and businesses and commuters coming into the district or who reside in the district to get folks out of their single occupancy vehicles and into more sustainable modes of transportation.
We work with all employers of all sizes in all industries. As such, there's a really varied array of needs when it comes to commuting and transportation. We provide a variety of webinars, trainings, lunch and learns that educate people about trends and relevant topics in transportation. And we keep an eye on the transportation situation throughout the city and provide relevant updates, best practices, and new information to our employer partners.
So to support travel behavior changes, we host a commuter challenge every year. In this challenge, 10 employers engage in a friendly competition to encourage their employees to log their sustainable trips.
In the last year, GoDCGo helped 36,000 people switch to more sustainable modes of transportation, which is the equivalent of removing 39,000 vehicles from our roadway by promoting active and sustainable activities and transportation options for visitors and residents and commuters.
Thank you, Kim. Sabeski, we are at noon, and that was a video from the TPB's Commuter Connections Employer Awards ceremony held on June 28th. So turn it over to you, Ms. Sabeski.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pam Sabeski. For those of you who by now don't know me, I'm the chair of the Transportation Planning Board, and I call the TPB's July 2022 meeting to order. Welcome to this virtual meeting. Although the pandemic-related restrictions on large gatherings have largely been lifted, we had previously agreed to conduct a few of our meetings virtually this year out of an abundance of caution. We had also previously discussed to hold some of our regular meetings virtually moving forward, even if there is no public emergency, which would require amending our bylaws, which we will talk about later during today's meeting. Also, in keeping with our recent practice, this meeting is being live streamed on TPB's YouTube channel. While we are all familiar with our virtual meetings procedure, for the benefit of those following the meeting online, I will briefly review the procedures. To start the meeting, I will ask staff to take a roll call of members or alternates to document their process at this meeting and determine that we have a quorum. Then for the action items on the agenda, I will have the presenter complete the briefing, then invite a motion to approve any resolution we plan to adopt and seek a second for the motion made. After the motion has been made and seconded, I will invite questions or comments in turn by jurisdiction before calling for a vote. For the vote, I will seek just the nays and abstentions and take the rest as yes votes. I will call for the votes in turn by jurisdictions. For the informational items, I will have the presenters complete their briefing and then invite questions, comments in turn by jurisdictions. I do want to adhere to the schedule and conclude the meeting on time, so I request all to be mindful of time during your comments and questions. Lastly, a friendly reminder to mute your microphones always, and importantly, to unmute your mic and state your name and jurisdiction when you do speak. Lynn, if you would please take a roll and confirm we have a quorum.
Great, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start with the name of your jurisdiction or agency, and if you could state your name, I will capture it. I will also, I recognize I go too fast, I will also keep an eye on our participant list as well. So let's start with the District of Columbia. District Council, Ms. Pinto.
Ella Hansen here.
Thank you. District Council, Charles Allen. District Council, Christina Henderson.
I'm here. Christina's here.
Thanks. District Office of Planning.
Sakina Khan here.
District Department of Transportation.
Leslie Rupert is here. Thank you.
Moving on to Maryland, City of Bowie. Charles County.
Present.
Ruben Collins, gotcha. College Park.
Patrick Wyan, present.
Denise Mitchell, present.
Gotcha both, thanks. Frederick County.
Jan Gardner, present.
City of Frederick.
Kelly Russell, present.
City of Gaithersburg.
Dennis Sunslinger, present.
Thanks, Dennis. City of Greenbelt. City of Laurel. Montgomery County Executive.
Gary Ehrenrich is present.
Thanks, Gary. Montgomery County Legislative. Prince George's County Executive. Prince George's County Legislative. City of Rockville.
Bridget Newton's present.
City of Tacoma Park.
Casey Kostick.
Thanks, Casey. Maryland House of Delegates.
Mark Orman.
Maryland Senate. Maryland Department of Transportation.
Earl Lewis, present.
So, moving on to Virginia, City of Alexandria. Arlington County.
Takis Karantonis, present.
Thank you. City of Fairfax. Fairfax County.
Walter Alcorn's here.
Thank you.
James Walkinshaw's here.
Thank you. Falls Church.
Dave Snyder here.
Thanks. Fauquier County.
Adam Schellenberger here.
Thank you. Loudoun County.
Kristen Umstadt here.
Yeah. Anyone else? City of Manassas.
Pam Sabeski here.
Thank you. Manassas Park.
Jeanette Rischel here.
Thank you. Prince William County.
Ann Wheeler here.
Dick Angry here.
Gotcha. Virginia House of Delegates. I think he's on vacation, actually. Virginia Senate.
Senator Dave Marsden here.
Thank you. Virginia Department of Transportation.
John Lynch is here.
WMATA.
Allison Davis is here.
Thank you. And then moving on to our ex officio, Federal Highway Administration. Federal Transit Administration. National Capital Planning Commission.
I'm here. This is Julia Coster. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. And National Park Service.
Lynn Jimmy Stone is here.
Oh, great. Thank you. So that concludes our roll call. We do have a quorum, and if you'd like, I can start into our public comments.
That'd be great. Go right ahead.
Great, thanks. So between the June 2022 TPB meeting and noon yesterday, which was Tuesday, July 19th, the TPB received 2 comments submitted via email. A memo with a summary of the comments as well as the comments themselves can be found on our TPB meeting page. Eric Brenner sent an email informing the TPB of a letter sent to MDOT by Senators Van Hollen and Cardin and Congressman Hoyer requesting the state to reconsider its plan to demolish the Harry W. Nice Thomas Mack Middleton Bridge. Bill Pugh from the Coalition for Smarter Growth also sent an email. He requested that TPB staff provide a schedule for the update to Visualize 2045 and also to consider updates to the TPB bylaws to include additional public participation. So as I mentioned, these comments are found on our meeting page. That concludes my report.
That's awesome. Thank you. As always, we will start with review of adopting the minutes of our June 15th, 2022 meeting. I invite a motion to adopt the minutes as provided. Please state your name and jurisdiction as you make the motion. Your name and jurisdiction, make the motion. Is there a second?
Second it. Dan Gardner.
Great. For the vote then, only nays and abstentions will be necessary. Remember to state your name and jurisdiction. We will start with the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia.
John Lynch, VDOT, abstain.
WMATA or other agencies? Minutes are approved. Okay, we have a written summary of the July 8th meeting of the Technical Committee. I will recognize Matt Arcieri, Chair of the Technical Committee. Matt, is there anything from the meeting that you would like to highlight or expand on?
No, thank you. You have my report from the July 8th Technical Committee, Madam Chair. The committee did cover the items that are coming up on your agenda shortly, including the car-free day promotional, the set-aside for TAP for Maryland, equity emphasis, and the bylaws update. The TPB also received some briefings on 2022 congestion management, technical report, bus equity, and an update on the myriad of grants that are coming out of the federal infrastructure bill. And with that, I stand ready for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your work there. We'll start with Maryland. Does anyone in Maryland have questions for Matt? How about the District of Columbia? Virginia? WMATA or other agencies? Okay, thank you, Matt. We have a written summary of the special joint meeting of our Community Advisory Committee meeting and members of this board. Before I ask Chair Ashley Hudson for her report, I would like to thank the Vice Chairs Ruben Collins and Christina Henderson and Board Member Casey Kostick for participating in this special meeting. I think the meeting helped each group gain some better insight on how each group works and how we can better work together in the future. Ashley, your thoughts and feedback from yourself and other members.
Yes, thank you. As Chair Sebeski mentioned, we met virtually last week and were joined by TPB officers Pam Sebeski, Ruben Collins, and Christina Henderson, as well as Casey Kostick. The meeting began with presentations from each of the TPB officers. In their remarks, the officers described the unique challenges each of their jurisdictions face. Comments from Manassas and Charles County focused on connectivity and the continuing needs of drivers, while the presentation from DC stressed safety and pedestrian-related issues. After a full group discussion, the session broke into 3 groups, giving all participants, CAC and TPB members alike, the chance to discuss regional transportation issues that pertain to their own states. When the group came back together, representatives from each state reported on the discussion points from the breakout sessions. The conversation among DC participants touched on street safety and the Safer Streets Amendment Act, support for bike lane networks, but ensuring the bike lanes interact well with the roads, concern about ridership on WMATA, and the need for electrical vehicle charging stations throughout the city. Maryland participants highlighted the needs of outer jurisdictions, such as Maryland Rapid Transit, and suggested the jurisdictions with greater resources could help the others. The Maryland participants also expressed concern about Maryland's diminishing attraction to business and perceived part of the problem to be linked to Maryland's transportation issues. The participants from Virginia emphasized the need for connecting jurisdictions and multimodal travel routes. The group agreed that in order to reduce emissions and vehicles on the road, the outer jurisdictions should support plans in the inner jurisdictions to expand transit and walking options, while recognizing that the outer jurisdictions are likely to remain largely dependent on automobile travel. There also appeared to be consensus among Virginians that another bridge across the Potomac is needed to alleviate the congestion on existing interstate highways. Collectively, the meeting was well attended and participation was absolutely enthusiastic. On behalf of the CAC, I want to thank the TPB officers and Councilwoman Kostick for joining us for a very insightful meeting. This concludes my report, and I am happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. I would like to just give a few comments, and that is that I want to encourage all members of the TPB to reach out to your CAC members, especially those that are from your jurisdictions, and find out their goals for participation on the CAC and how they relate to your goals here at the TPB. I also would encourage you to have those CAC members come before your whole elected bodies and speak briefly about their service and representation on the CAC. I really appreciate the CAC inviting us to have this joint meeting, and will be recommending to the staff that both future boards continue to meet annually, but do so earlier in the year. I am so glad that they came up with this idea and we were all able to participate. Maybe next time more TPB members will be able to join us. It was a really great meeting. So at this time, I'd like to see if my colleagues that attended on the board might have anything to add. I'll start with Ruben.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It was a great opportunity because bottom line, it helped me further understand the scope of TPB and the relationship with CAC. I think it was a great opportunity to kind of express goals and aspirations on a regional level. And for me, it was an educational opportunity, quite frankly. Educational learning.
Thank you. How about you, Christine Henderson from the District of Columbia?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Sebeski. I really appreciated the ability to join the CAC members and hear some feedback. And then also, it was an opportunity, I think, for some cross-jurisdiction questions, since for many of us, we have overlapping media markets issues that percolate in one jurisdiction. Some members had some questions about, and so that was a great opportunity to clarify some things and clear some things up. So thank you for organizing that, and thanks to Ashley for making that happen.
Great. And how about Ms. Kostick, Casey?
Thank you. I just want to reiterate my thanks to the TPB leadership and to the CAC for the chance to attend, and really encourage other members as well to, when there are future opportunities to attend, because it was really just a great conversation, great opportunity to connect and learn more about what the CAC is doing and how we can work together better.
Great. So I think overall it sounds like it was a very positive experience, and so I appreciate all the feedback. But we'll start with questions for Ashley from Virginia. Does anyone from Virginia have any questions for Ms. Hudson? Maryland? District of Columbia?
I have a quick question.
Sure.
So one comment you made toward the end was that the people in the Virginia jurisdictions were interested in an additional river crossing. Is that correct? Or are they talking about an outer crossing, or what was the specific nature of the request?
Yeah, there was consensus that a bridge is needed. There was actually a lot of excitement around the concept. There was discussion about whether it could be from the 95 corridor, possibly across to Charles County, or perhaps in the northern part of the state, maybe from Loudoun to Montgomery County. There was also discussion, some sad remarks about the White's Ferry being closed down. One member voiced that was one of our successful routes across the Potomac, and it was sad that it's gone away. So that was kind of the nature of the conversation.
Okay, any further questions there? What about WMATA or other agencies? Okay, thank you again, Ms. Hudson, and thank you again to the CAC for the opportunity. Definitely think the feedback is positive. Okay, we have a written summary of the July 8th Steering Committee meeting and the Director's Report. Conti, is there anything you would like to highlight and anything new to share with the board?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. You have a copy of my written report, but I would like to provide some additional background on a couple of items. The steering committee action this month earlier was a little bit different, something we don't do typically every year, and that is issuing a broad letter of support for a list of transportation projects in Northern Virginia that the Northern Virginia TPB member agencies are submitting to the Commonwealth of Virginia for state funding, right? So the transportation funds that Virginia Department of Transportation and Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation allocate has to go through this process called Smart Scale, which is essentially a project prioritization process, and projects are evaluated and they're ranked and what have you. So as part of agencies submitting projects requesting state funding, they are required to receive a letter of support from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is what the TPB is. So the TPB issued a general letter of support, which implies that the TPB supports the member agencies seeking funding. The action in no way guarantees that if they receive the money, the project will automatically be included in the plan. And there are highway projects, there are transit projects, there are bike ped projects, because the TPB has its own process of evaluating and adding projects to its plan and tip. So just wanted to give that background. And we get these requests once every 2 years or so. And this smart scale process is relatively new, and it's been used for transportation funding by the Commonwealth of Virginia. Also, last month, and by the way, the list of projects that were in this support letter are on pages 8 and 9 of my report. And none of these projects are currently in the plan and tip. right? Because obviously there's no funding, so therefore they can't be in the plan or TIP. So another item, last month, as part of the TPB adopting the updated long-range transportation plan in the TIP, the resolution advised the staff to provide to the federal agencies the additional information for the Maryland managed lanes projects, specifically the commitments for other transit and TDM projects, as soon as the feds indicated that they were going to take action on the final environmental impact statement document. The Federal Highway published that notification that they were reviewing the final environmental impact statement document for the managed lanes project on June 17th. And on July 1st, TPB provided with all the information that it had received from MDOT, outlining what other commitments they have made. And those details are on pages 11 through 19 of my report. Lastly, I would like to thank Vice Chair Ruben Collins for conducting the Commuter Connections Employers Award Ceremony. He did a fantastic role as the MC of the event at National Press Club on June 28th. Members saw a video of that event earlier today. And also thank you, Madam Chair, for taking the time and giving away a couple of the TPB awards for the area employers. And then we congratulate all the employers who received the award. So 2 items that are not in my written report. One, the finalized Visualized 2045 plan document, which now includes the new climate change mitigation goals and strategies that was adopted. That is currently with the printers. It is being printed. We hope to receive it very soon. As soon as we get it, we plan to send at least 1 copy of the entire plan document to each member and a couple of extra copies of the executive summary of the long-range transportation plan to each member. If you need more copies, please feel free to email me or Lynn, and we'll make sure that you get it. The second one is more of a heads up that in September, we are anticipating a comprehensive, large amendment to the TIP that was just adopted in June. And there are a couple reasons why. Since the June steering committee meeting, we have not been entertaining any amendments to the TIP from any of the TPB member agencies. That's because a new TIP would have been adopted, the feds would be reviewing it, and the feds had advised us, don't keep changing it and amending it while we are reviewing it. So we had held off on everything. So the transportation agencies really need those TIP amendments to reflect the latest funding and to be able to draw down on it. So they've been waiting for this review. So as soon as the Federal Highway completes their review, we expect a bunch of amendments to come to us in September. And the second reason is September 30th marks the end of the federal fiscal year. So any funding that all of the transportation agencies have, they would have to reallocate or do some things with it. And that's why we expect a big amendment. None of these will be substantively different because all of those projects are already in the plan and in the TIP. It will only be a big amendment in terms of the amount of money. Might be a couple of $100 million of funds being moved around from one fiscal year to another year or from one project to another. So just a heads up that that's coming our way in September, hopefully. So that was it. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions on staff's activities.
Thank you, Conti. Any questions from the District of Columbia? Maryland? Virginia?
Hi, Madam Chair. Hi, Dave Snyder. Conti, we had a request from the public, and I think you partially answered it about the Visualize 2045. What's the schedule going forward? And the publication you mentioned, can you give us a firmer date on the publication?
We are hoping to receive the printed copies by end of this month, and you should have copies of all of that by end of this month, hopefully. The digital copy is already available on the TPB website, but we are also working on an executive summary, which draws attention to the policy element, particularly the amendments, the enhancements made to the TPB policy priorities. So we hope to have that by end of this month, Mr. Snyder.
Okay, thanks very much. And then following that, is there a schedule for further discussion and developments on that?
Yes, in the coming months, there are a couple different follow-up items that was discussed during June. For example, one of them is how might TPB be monitoring and reporting on some of this greenhouse gas reduction strategies, right? So that is part of it. So we are working on what activities are currently underway. For example, the Council of Governments produces a actual current year or the latest year greenhouse gas inventory for all different sectors. So we are working with them to see, how we can enhance that reporting within the transportation sector. So we'll have some ideas and report back to the TPB. I think the good news is, from my perspective, I think we are resourced to be able to do some additional monitoring and reporting. I don't think we will need new resources. So we should be able to come report back to you all.
Okay, thank you.
One other item during the public comment, one of the comments received was a letter being sent to some federal authorities on the idea of not dismantling the old Nice Bridge. And I think TPB members might remember or recall a few years ago when there was discussion about that. The idea there was the provision of a bike ped facility on the new bridge. And there was the preference was that it would be barrier separated, and that was not what the final design now entails. During those discussions, there was an idea that why don't we retain the old bridge and turn it into a bike ped sort of thing. So that's the comment letter. So I know Mr. Lewis from MDOT is here, so I want to see if he has anything to share with the board. Mr. Lewis? Earl, you're muted.
Sorry, I do know we are preparing a response letter to the senators. So we did receive that, and obviously we look forward to sharing that with everyone. I'd also add on David Snyder's comments. It's also great that the TPB has taken action already related to on-road greenhouse gas, and we've started that discussion already. That sort of puts us, a little bit on schedule or ahead of schedule with the recent request from the federal government. So compared to the other MPOs in the states, that's great. Thanks.
Mr. Snyder, are you done? I'll call, if you are, I will call on Casey Kostick.
Thank you. I just wanted to build on Mr. Snyder's questions about the Visualize 2045 plan, and we're finishing up this plan that we just adopted, but we also had planned to do an early update of it as well. So I was curious what sort of time frame we're looking at for the early update and that work, which I imagine probably needs to start relatively soon as well.
Yep. We are everybody catching a breath, making sure that the plan that we just adopted is printed and the ink is dry, and then we will immediately begin to work on updating it to whatever extent a very quick update can reflect. So staff is already looking at what is the schedule. As you recall, the current update took us 2.5 years, and the next update is 4 years away. So in between these two, in the 4 years, we have to do this an additional update. So those discussions are underway. We hope to have some reporting back to the board soon.
Thank you.
Okay, how about next will be Mark Corman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Conti, I'll direct this question to you, but I think you're going to have to share it with Secretary Lewis, because I did want to follow up on the Nice Bridge. I appreciate that the administration is going to respond to the U.S. senators. Obviously, when you get a letter, it's great to respond. I guess I'm curious about the timing of that response, and you referenced sharing it with us. Will that be on a contemporaneous basis? Will you send us the response after you send it to the senators, or what's the timeline we should be expecting?
Earl?
Got to unmute again. I'll have to check on the timeline, but I think there was a date that they wanted us to respond by. So I'm going to assume we're going to meet the senator's response date. And usually those type of letters, when they go out, end up being shared with others, given the public interest.
So in terms of timing, Mr. Coleman, you're right in the sense, after this meeting, after today's meeting, the TPB will not meet in August and our next meeting will be in September. That said, I'm happy to work with Earl as soon as that letter is available to distribute it to the TPB leadership. Even though there's no other meetings, we can make that happen.
I appreciate it. I'm not in the TPB leadership, so if you're willing to share it with me as well, I would.
Oh, no, wait, when I said leadership with the TPB membership, yes, we'll share it with everybody.
Thank you, Conti. Thank you, Earl, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome. So I don't see any other hands. Are there any other questions for Conti from anybody? We got off track anyway. Okay. Then it's time for chairman's remarks. I will be brief, as I don't really have a whole lot to say that I haven't already said. I will let everyone know that myself and the two vice chairs have been invited to attend the annual retreat of the COG Board of Directors later this month. I believe it is important for TPB to continue its partnership with the COG Board, given the relationship and impacts of TPB's work in transportation on the work activities of the COG Board that involve land use and the environment, public health, public safety, all of those things. So just so you know, I look forward to this opportunity. I don't know that the TPB people have attended before, so I look forward to being able to represent and have some good conversation and collegial time with the members of the COG Board of Directors. So now, to the first of our two action items, proclaiming September 22nd of this year as a car-free day is an action that I propose we do with unanimous consent. So unless I hear any objection, I will not seek a motion for approval. But Nick Ramos of staff will get us started. Nick?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to get my presentation up here. Hopefully everybody could see that. Okay,
Yes,
just wanted to brief everybody on the Car Free Day, which is going to be happening this fall. And just to give you a little bit of a background on the event, it started back in the mid-1990s in Europe, and it went global in the year 2000. And today it's celebrated in about 1,500 cities in 40 countries. And these are just some shots of some international events that have happened last year. So there's a shot from England, Poland, and India. And the event does coincide with European Mobility Week, and that's an annual campaign that runs from about mid-September through the 22nd, and it really aims to promote sustainable transportation as alternatives to use of an automobile. And the week ends on Car Free Day, which is on September 22nd, and a lot of the participating cities set aside one or more areas just for pedestrians, cyclists, as well as public transportation users for the entire day. For our region, the event began in the District of Columbia in 2007, and it went region-wide in 2008. And it promotes various forms of transportation, including transit use, bicycling, scootering, walking, as well as car light methods such as the use of carpools and van pools, and of course, teleworking. And the event really isn't just for commuters, it's also for many others. So whether you're a senior, student, or people who ordinarily travel using their vehicle by themselves to do errands or go to work or go to classes, that's the whole idea behind getting folks to get involved of all stripes and colors. And our pledge goal for this year is going to be 5,000 pledges. We did conduct our first ever survey of Car Free Day back in 2019 and found that almost 100% of the respondents used a car free or car light option during the event. And transit use was a little less used than what was pledged, but the options that were used were generally in line with the options that were pledged. Over 70% of the respondents who changed their commute made on Car Free Day would most likely would have driven alone to work that day. And about a third of the respondents increased use of car free and car light options for non-work trips since their participation in Car Free Day. And then there was a slight increase in the average frequency of car free and car light use for work trips. So today, as Chairman Sebesky noted, there is a regional proclamation before you, and this is just a screenshot of last year's TPP proclamation signing by Charles Allen. And we do get a lot of media coverage, although I will say the last 2 years have not been as robust as previous years, and I think the pandemic had a lot to do with that, so we're hoping that that's going to change this year. We also have partnerships with Clean Air Partners as well as American Heart Association to promote the event. And there is also a website for the event. It's carfreemetrodc.org. And it allows individuals to go there to take the pledge, as well as get all kinds of great information on the various mobility options that are available for them on that particular day. We do have a leaderboard that we provide, and it basically tracks pledges by mode, and it kind of shows who's in the lead. And of course, last year, our telework group had pretty much the edge on everyone, although the walk and run folks also had a pretty high percentage of participants. We will be providing promotional flyers. They'll be available electronically, and we'll also provide those to employers around the region. And then we also have a Facebook and Twitter page. So for those of you who are into social media, feel free to follow us on those pages. And then we also have paid social media that we'll be conducting, as well as some digital ads that we'll be running like we did last year. And then we also reach out for sponsors, and these are folks that will provide various prizes and incentives to those that elect to pledge to go car free or car light. And then we team up with some of the radio stations to do a lot of outreach to various communities to get folks engaged in the event. We also do ads on Spotify, and we've done ads on Pandora as well in the past. We also team up with many of the local jurisdictions with the transit agencies. So this is just one example of an ad that ran on a ride-on bus last year, and we plan to do the same again for this year. And we also will run sponsored articles. We did this last year, and we got a lot of hits on that. And then many of the jurisdictions hold their own events as well. So City of Manassas, Arlington County, Montgomery County, Tri-County Council for Southern Maryland, City of Frederick, Prince George's County, as well as Prince William County, all had some very robust events last year, and we're expecting similar events for this year. And then we also work with all of the local universities on a capital area college challenge. It's a campus challenge, and it's just kind of a friendly competition in terms of who can get the most pledges. This past year, University of Maryland won that challenge, and they broke a streak that was for many years from GW, and so we're very happy that we had a new crown winner this past year. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody may have.
Thank you, Nick. It's always an exciting time for those of us out here in Manassas. Unfortunately, not a lot of options to be car free, but I think a lot of people are more people are working telework. So I'll entertain any questions from the District of Columbia, Virginia, Maryland, WMATA, or other agencies. All right. Thank you, Nick. And we'll look for those ads in September.
Okay, and with that, we're very happy that you will be signing the proclamation, and we have a photo of you signing it, and we'll be able to use this for various social media and outreach campaigns that we'll be doing. And we're hoping that other jurisdictions will move forth and adopt similar proclamations prior to the event. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Okay, the last action item for today. A few months ago, we approved a set of projects in Virginia that were recommended to us to receive federal transportation alternative programs grant funds. Today, we will do the same for Maryland's projects, or should I say project, singular. Our staff, John Swanson, will give us some background and present the recommendations of the selection committee. After that, I will ask for a motion to adopt resolution R1-2023. John, please take it away.
We'll just wait okay.
I'm John Swanson, and I'm going to present recommendations for funding in Maryland under the Federal Transportation Alternatives Set-Aside Program. This is a grant program commonly called TAP. TAP funding provides the TPB with opportunities to fund projects that really implement policies that we care about as a region, and that the board has approved. And today we're going to be asking you to approve one project, which is a key piece of the National Capital Trail Network, which is the regional trail system that the TPB approved 2 years ago. And it's a regional trail system from one end of the region to the other, but this is a project in Frederick County. So next slide, please. Yeah, so here's an overview of my presentation. I'll just say that we come to you on a regular basis. I come to you 3 times a year because we have 3 sub-allocations for each of our 3 state-level jurisdictions. So I'll try to move through this pretty quickly. Next slide. Just some background. It's a federal program. It's a grant program. It has a sort of a legacy going back to the early 90s. And it's really designed to fund projects that are considered to be alternatives to traditional highway construction, bike ped facilities, including sidewalks and crosswalks, trails and shared use paths, safe routes to school projects, and other community improvements. Last year's infrastructure bill reaffirmed the federal commitment to the program and has increased funding for it, which we're very pleased about. We are involved with this program because under federal law in the 2013-2012, large MPOs like the TPB are provided with sub-allocated funds on an annual basis, and we're responsible for selecting projects for those funds. However, our state DOT partners really do most of the work here. They solicit projects through the application period, and then they ultimately are responsible for ensuring that they are implemented. So we're really thankful to them. And I want to just take this moment to really thank our partners at MDOT for their work throughout this recent selection process. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. Selection process. So we've been using the same selection process for a number of years. We convened a selection panel. We bring in folks who are responsible at the state levels for implementing the TAP programs with our state DOTs. They have a lot of expertise in the program, as well as we include staff from COG and TPB who have expertise in these kinds of projects. We also included, of course, MDOT staffer Christy Bernal, who provided technical resources and a lot of backup. We had a lot of back and forth, some really good discussions. Prior to the panel meeting, individual panelists reviewed and scored the applications. And the average scores for the applications from the basis for the beginning of our conversations, but the final recommendations are based upon consensus, not the scores.
Next slide, please. This is the schedule that we're working within this year. It's a fairly tight schedule for Maryland. There's a 1-month application period. I did send messages, and MDOT did work to get the word out ahead of time that this application period was going to be coming up. We had a selection panel, as I mentioned already, that met twice in June, and today you're being asked to approve the recommendation of that selection panel. However, it doesn't end there. Once the TPB takes action today, the selection process continues. There's a pot of statewide money that MDOT has control over, and they will be selecting projects for those funds in the August-September timeframe. And I really want to emphasize that the applications from our region that the TPB cannot fund will be eligible for those statewide funds. So more about that at the end of the presentation. Next slide. So, sort of overall, we have received 7 applications for more than $7 million in request if we funded everything. The funds available to the TPB and our sub-allocation this year was $5.1 million. And we're recommending that the TPB fully expend those funds through the action that I'm going to be describing in a minute. Next slide. So here's a list of the applications. This is in your, this was included in your mail out memo, so you should have had a chance to look at it. You can tell though, just like at a glance, that the requested funding amounts are very uneven. The TPB received one very large application, which calls for more than $5 million, which is slightly more than the money we have available. And then the other 6 applications are much smaller, generally of $500,000 or less. So as we looked at this list and discussed it, we realized that MDOT rules really tightly constrain the choices available to our selection panel. Since 2020, MDOT has not permitted projects to be partially funded under the TAP program. Under this rule, the only way an MPO was permitted to partially fund a project would be for the MPO to fully expend its sub-allocation on a single project. And then if that project still isn't fully funded, MDOT would agree to pick up the remainder of the project costs using statewide funds. So I'll say without that rule, our panel might have done something differently. We might have chosen to figure out how to partially fund the large project and fund some other things as well, but that option was not available to us. So just in a summary, we were facing 2 choices here. One, fund one large project, which would be the FNPL Trail in Frederick County, or 2, fund the other applications, but not that large project. However, if you just do some quick math here, you'll see that funding the other 6 applications would be still less than $2 million. That would leave over $3 million on the table. According to MDOT rules, those unspent funds could not be rolled into the statewide funds for next year, and they would be those unspent funds would be then instead rolled over into the statewide funds. So not a bad thing, but that was the option available to us. And to be honest, leaving $3 million on the table was not super appealing to our selection panel. Next slide, please. So the selection of the panel was, after a lot of discussion, to go for the one project. This is going to fully expend the entire sub-allocation of $5,169,000. 2% of the project request would be left unfunded. That's $110,000, and MDOT will pick up that remainder of the funding. So, next slide. This was, a difficult decision and somewhat, unusual, frankly, for us to face. We like to sort of, be able to fund lots of things. We had some really good applications. However, I don't want to sort of, diminish the recommendation that we are making. Because this is a great project. The Frederick, Pennsylvania line rail trail is going to construct a nearly 2-mile trail north of Frederick. It's going to connect to a project in the city of Frederick, the East Street Rails with Trails project, which we have supported through the TLC program. It's going to access a commuter rail lot and and do a lot of great things. So the panel's reason for selecting this really boiled down to some really key points. It was the only application we received for construction funding, and we really like to see things built and sort of, moving forward that way. And we're excited about that piece. The project is Frederick County's highest priority trail project and has received strong support from the bike ped advocacy community up there. The application itself was very strong. We received a similar application last year, and they've really done a lot of work to get it ready to actually be constructible. So we are excited about that. And finally, from a regional perspective, we looked at this and thought this is a piece of the National Capital Trail Network. The National Capital Trail Network, as many of you remember, was approved by the TPB 2 years ago. The original design for the Capital Trail Network was a smaller piece of the region. It did not include the outer jurisdictions, and TPB staff and our partners in the bike ped community and our partners with the local governments did a lot of work to expand that trail network, and included sort of the projects in Frederick, Charles, Loudoun, and Prince William. So we were really pleased to be able to expand this and make it a full regional trail network. Frederick County has been doing tremendous work with its trail planning in recent years, and so we're really pleased to be able to support that piece as well. So this is very much consistent with a very key regional goal, the National Capital Trail Network, which is one of our 7 aspirational initiatives. So with that in mind, actually, next slide, some pictures. This is the picture of the actual trail, where the trail will be, and we're talking about a rail with trail, a trail that will coexist with a railroad line. And the picture on the right is a facility in a trail in Western Maryland that will be something like what this trail will ultimately look like. So next slide. With all that explanation, we're asking you to adopt resolution number 1 for this year, R1 2023, and it's going to provide funding for the for the Frederick and Pennsylvania Line Rail Trail, and it's going to encourage MDOT using the statewide funding available to fund several projects which we were excited about, but unfortunately can't fund this round. And they are listed there: the Twin Brook Safe Routes to School project in Rockville, also just a transit access project, the West 7th Street Protected Bicycle Lane project in city of Frederick, traffic calming at the Catoctin Furnace district in Frederick County, and then finally a connectivity study in the city of Frederick. All great projects and very consistent with many of our regional goals and policies. So thank you. I'm excited to be supporting this project and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution R1 2023 to approve a project for funding under the Federal Transportation Alternative Set-Aside Program for Suburban Maryland for FY 2023? Please state your name and jurisdiction.
I'm Jan Gardner from Frederick County, and I'm really pleased and excited about this project, and I'm pleased to make the motion to adopt Resolution R1-2023.
There's a second.
City of Frederick is pleased to second.
Great. So for the vote, just nays or abstentions, starting with the District of Columbia.
Madam Chair, I thought there was a question from Mr. Boyer.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to just comment that I'm very excited to see that the recommendation is for the full use of the Transportation Alternatives Funds. Unlike some previous years, it's good to see all the money being spent. Also excited to see the great project in Frederick County moving forward and getting that funding. I did have a question. I wonder if, as a part of the provisions in the infrastructure bill that passed last year included an allowance for states to set aside 5% of the funds for technical assistance, and I'm wondering if the COG is tracking, or if the state DOTs, in particular MDOT, might be able to comment about how they're planning on using that allowance. Because I do think that could, it's great to see good projects move forward this year. It does seem like it's a lot of it's concentrated in Frederick City and Frederick County. So getting in the future, hopefully we can work more with some of the jurisdictions that might not have applied or might be reluctant to apply for transportation alternatives funds. And I'm wondering if we could, if there's any sense about how those technical assistance funds could be used to ensure that that we do get a broad range of project submissions.
Excellent.
This is Kanti. I'll welcome either Leslie from DDOT or John from VDOT or Earl from MDOT, if they have given some thought to what the new requirement, what their thoughts are on it. But given that this is still new, some of the regulations are still being developed, we'll be happy to follow up and bring that topic back. As John said, this is an ongoing thing, and it's going to be very helpful that not only is there some additional funding from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, there are also some enhanced flexibilities that are being provided to existing programs. So thank you. Earl, John, or Leslie?
Well, I'll just comment quickly in terms of the infrastructure bill. That's all being handled out of our secretary's office. So they're dealing with, as some of you know, letters of support, as well as if VDOT would be pursuing funding, as well as how that's going to be distributed as the rules and guidelines come out.
This is Leslie with DDOT, and thank you for the opportunity. And similarly, we're working on pulling together our own plans to best utilize the new funding source. Thank you.
We'll
Can I just add something? Mr. Lewis wanted to speak. I can just add quickly that I have spoken with MDOT and VDOT staff, Christy Bernal and MDOT, and Pam Liston and VDOT. They're aware of that 5% opportunity, Mr. Woyan, and there's discussion about increasing staff, doing more training, doing more outreach, definitely earlier in the process. MDOT staff does a tremendous job with this program, but there's been a lot of staff constraint. They're really kind of really stretched out there, and so I think this, as you're suggesting, this could provide a tremendous little boost. It's not a huge amount of extra money, but I think it could really provide a lot of support for them to get not just more applications, but better applications, which is something we've talked about extensively already.
All right.
Thank you. It'd be great. I don't know what happened to Mr. Lewis, but I'd love to hear MDOT's response at some point as well. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis still on the call? If not, I know Casey Kostick has her hand up too, but do you want to let can anyone staff tell me whether or not Mr. Lewis is still on the line?
I believe I'm not able to. Yeah, I think he's on the line. I don't know if his line is muted or he's having some technical difficulties. Perhaps we can take the question from Ms. Kostick and then see if Mr. Lewis would respond.
Yeah, that's a fabulous plan. Go ahead, Ms. Kostick, and we'll go back to Mr. Lewis.
Thank you. And my question comment is probably also more for MDOT than for TPB. But I just wonder about the effectiveness of the rule that the projects can't be partially funded. And it seems like in this case, we have a good outcome. I think it's a great project that we're funding and totally support that. But I could see a situation where this could be really limiting and could prevent us from meeting our goals as TPB and being able to fund the projects on the smaller scale that need support and assistance, particularly for smaller jurisdictions that maybe can't afford even a small amount. So I'd love to kind of think through and hear more about where that rule came from and whether there could be some opportunity to see if that's really meeting the goals that it should be.
Thank you. Do we know if Mr. Lewis is yet back online to be able to talk?
So I would say I see his name. I know often some people get distracted or call. I texted him, but I haven't heard from him. He may have stepped away.
Now, I also know one other member from Maryland has texted. They're having some technical issues from Prince George's County. So we'll follow up with Mr. Lewis.
Okay, maybe he could, supply a response to these questions. Hopefully it doesn't impact the vote on this resolution, but they seemed like good questions that you could get back to the members that asked those questions.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, I'm going to go ahead and ask for the vote, remembering only nays and abstentions, and we'll start with WMATA or other agencies. The District of Columbia, Virginia, and Maryland. Okay, seems like that passed.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Great discussion. Thank you. Okay, so on to our informational item. This information item. Last month we updated the long-range transportation plan we adopted in 2018, and this month Sergio on staff will brief us on the updates to the equity emphasis area mapping we had adopted back in 2018. Go ahead, Sergio.
Thank you, Chair Sabeski. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you and hope everyone's having a lovely summer. As noted, I will be speaking to and providing an update on the update to equity emphasis areas for this region that is used as part of our environmental justice analysis of our long-range plan. So today's presentation will look to primarily tackle the following bullets. I'll try to provide an update summary and some key takeaways, and then follow through with why we conducted this update, what inputs are being updated, and just as importantly, what things were not changed as part of this work. Speak a little bit about and get into a little more details of those primary changes, and then wrap up with some responses to frequently asked questions and our next steps for this work. After the conclusion of my planned remarks, we do have allocated, I think, about 15 minutes or so for any questions or discussion, and happy to support that part of this presentation and item. So for those of you who may not know, what are equity emphasis areas and how does the TPB use them? So as straightforward as possible, equity emphasis areas are small geographic areas with higher concentrations of 4 groups compared to the regional average that are identified as part of our environmental justice requirements. They include low income and then traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups to include Black or African American, Hispanic or Latino, and Asian population groups. A more detailed breakdown of that methodology is linked. I will throw it into the link here and it flashes a flash, as well as included as Appendix A as in the memo as part of the mail-out materials. Our primary purpose for this work is to support the environmental justice analysis of the long-range plan. This helps us understand the impact of the transportation improvements approved as part of that plan on these areas, equity emphasis areas, as compared to the remainder of the region. That part of the work, the actual analysis on the impact, is considered phase 2 of this work. In addition, COG and this board have gone on to endorse these areas to help support equity considerations when developing plan, policies, and programs, both at the regional level, as well as many of you all taking it back to your own jurisdictions to help support the work you do in this field. So as far as those key takeaways, those key early takeaways, the result of this 2020 update work designates 364 of the region's 1,330 tracks as equity emphasis areas. You can think of that as a 4% increase in the number of tracks designated as EEAs compared to when we first did this back in 2018. However, it is also very important to know that it's a very similar share to all tracks, about 27% of all tracks in this region, as was identified in 2018, which was around 29% all tracks in this region. And this is the case because since the last time we did this analysis, and we'll go into more detail here in a bit, U.S. Census has increased the total number of tracks in our region, a net 108 additional tracks analyzed, or a 9% increase. What's also important to know is that when reviewing the distribution patterns of equity emphasis areas in the region, we did not identify a significant change. We see similar patterns as those identified in 2018. Further, the composition of population groups within equity emphasis areas also did not see a dramatic change. I'm also going to move a video of myself and also, in addition, move on to present the map of the 2022 update to equity emphasis areas in our region. A few things to note as I leave the map on the screen is that staff has found that the spatial distribution of the patterns are similar to those from the 2018 designation. East-west divide in this region is still predominant. We do have clusters of equity emphasis areas in both inner suburban and outer suburban parts of the region. And then when you get to sort of the outer suburban parts of this region and the more sparsely populated and even considered rural parts of the region, we have a handful of large tracts. And these large tracts are really an artifact of the methodology in which we had tracts that need that level of space in order to have statistically significant data for the sampling requirements for the demographic data. And not shared yet, but I will include in the chat now as well. If I have, maybe right after, I'll try and see if I can stop sharing my screen and go ahead and throw in the chat the link to the interactive that we've put together for your support and the support to all individuals in this region, as well as that methodology I was speaking of. And I'll also go ahead and put it up on the screen. And our intent with this interactive is very similar to if you have seen or were a part of our discussions previously, a product to support everyone in the region to better understand and to use this product, both here at the TPB as well as within your jurisdictions. And my apologies as I look off to my second screen. But this interactive, which was just dropped into the chat, when you open it up, you will see and have a how-to on how to use it. But generally on the bottom, we have about 4 features, the most important one being on the left-hand side, the turn layers on and off button. And as I zoom into the region, we continue to present the equity emphasis areas layer. And we also have activity centers for those of you who may want to open that and take a look at that. And when you click on a track that's highlighted, it will present additional information for this EEA layer, includes the actual index score that's spoken to about in the methodology, as well as concentrations compared to the regional average to support that review. In addition, we have the 4 groups that go into the index methodology, and I'll stop and open up and turn on the low-income population one. And this provides you detailed information about concentration of individuals whose household income is reported as low income. And one can click on a track in this area, as well as see information about the population, the share, the percent of that population, of that track's population. Just do a little math by moving the decimal places a couple places over. We'll need to fix that. But again, this does not mean 0.2% identifies low income, instead 20%. And then again, concentration and the index score for that particular group. And that repeats itself for 3 remaining groups. So I'll unselect low income, select African American or Black population group and their concentration in this region. Switch over to individuals identify as Asian and their concentration and scoring as part of the index for identifying equity emphasis areas. And finally, Hispanic or Latino population. So this interactive is available for you all to use moving forward, and we'll be working to get this out to all our communities and all our folks who may be interested in this work as we continue our work on environmental justice. finally want to note, for those of you who may be power users, is that we have a layer for all data for equity emphasis areas. So by clicking on that, you can still get a pop-up with some summary information about that particular track. But then also this on the far right-hand side, an attribute table where one is able to download the data and continue any analysis that you may have for yourself. So while I go ahead and stop sharing my screen to remove the interactive and return to my PowerPoint presentation, 1 second, please. I'll happily be able to continue with the remainder of the presentation. So shifting to why the 2022 update and why we do this update. The Transportation Planning Board does have a federal requirement to conduct an environmental justice analysis of its latest update to the Long Range Transportation Plan. And since this board approved the update of Visualize 2045 in June, we've gone ahead and begun that process of updating our EJ analysis. Again, phase 1 is the identification of equity emphasis areas, which then helps us actually conduct the analysis itself, which will be part of phase 2. To try and answer the question, what inputs are being updated? So while that TPB approved methodology for identifying equity emphasis areas has not changed, we do have the inputs. That is the data that goes into implementing the method has seen updates. A 2020 update to census data has changed the number and some boundaries of census tracts in our region. Then the demographic data itself has also been updated. We're now using census data from the 5-year period 2016 to 2020. In phase 2, this data that we put together, along with the updated transportation and land use data that is part of our modeling work goes together for the 2022 update of Visualize 2045, is used to conduct the analysis of the environmental justice analysis. Now to briefly review the changes to the inputs in phase 1, starting with census tracts. As a review, for those who may not know, census tracts are small, relatively stable geographic boundaries used by the United States Census to provide data that can be compared over time at a smaller scale. They do respect state and county boundaries, so you won't have a tract that crosses a state boundary or a county boundary. In addition, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, city-county equivalent boundaries. And they also use visible and identifiable features to help support the boundaries that are put together. On average, a tract has about 4,000 inhabitants, but that can range from 1,200 on the low end to 8,000 on the high end. And those numbers are important. So when the United States Census actually goes through the process of reevaluating tracts for the entire country, what they do is that if a tract is split when it reaches greater than 8,000 inhabitants, so it will be broken up into 2 to get closer to that 4,000 average. Then when we have tracts that decrease their inhabitant population to less than 1,200 inhabitants, that tract is adjoined with a neighboring one to meet that those requirements that they set forth. So for what that means for our region is that as one can assume, population grew, and so we have a net increase of about 108 tracts in this region between the last time we did this analysis and now. On the demographic data side, we updated the analysis with the most recent census data available for all the population groups analyzed. For us, in this analysis, that meant using 2016 to 2020 American Community Survey data. And some top-level findings from that update is that, first and foremost, the region's population grew by over 200,000 people between those 2 periods. However, and this is important, is that the share of historically disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups or low income remained relatively constant between those 2 data set collections. And that is presented and represented on the right-hand chart on the screen now. So additional summary details of these changes between the 2018 analysis and this 2022 update. Again, a net 13 additional tracks identified as equity emphasis areas, but a very similar share to all tracks in this region. Then the share of groups represented within equity emphasis areas themselves also remains similar, which is for us and staff when we conducted this work, it's all evidence to suggest that our 2022 update mimics the findings and intent that were initially established with that 2018 work. My next slide presents the changes between the initial equity emphasis areas and this update. Green are new equity emphasis areas, 93 tracks. In orange are the tracks that are the same between the current and this update, are 271 tracks. And purple identified discontinued equity emphasis areas, 98 tracks. I do want to note that the changes may not nest due to those changes in track boundaries that we talked about between the two times we did this work. The next 3 slides or so talk a little bit about frequently asked questions that we both internally as staff, when we're conducting this work, we're getting, as well as what we expect to receive from when we have previously done this presentation. So if you allow me, I'd like to walk through those with this board and to hopefully get in front of some questions that you all may have. Are the 271 equity emphasis areas from 2018 that are unchanged? So that set that are unchanged that were presented in orange. In 22, the exact same geographic spaces. And in most cases, and to the average eye, yes, very much so. Updated tracks might have caused minor boundary changes. In a lot of cases, no changes at all. Now, could you, another question we have to get is, could you kind of try to explain why some of the 2018 EEAs are not identified in 2022 while new ones appear? And so there are many reasons why a track in a region may or may not be identified as an equity emphasis area. Our intent is to provide the what, so what we did and the work we did to identify these areas as transparent as possible. But that why question becomes much more difficult to answer. And so a couple of responses that we think might help are presented here. So this TPB methodology that we use relies on an index scoring with thresholds. This means that modest changes in the demographic makeup of a track, particularly in ones that are near or were that threshold previously, could cause it to be dropped or be added as an equity emphasis area in this current round or update. Then changes to local land use impacting the area can impact an area in a myriad of ways, including displacement, increase or decrease in a track's population, or other changes that impact the concentration of low-income or traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups can play a role into why a track may have been no longer included as an equity area or added as one as well. Moving on, and I suspect many of you may be having this question, is that my jurisdiction or agency is using the 2018 equity emphasis areas to advance our own equity considerations. How are we to use these newly defined areas that you're presenting now, and what will happen to that existing data? So we are very much supportive of the use of the 2018 equity emphasis areas by our member jurisdictions and external stakeholders to inform local decision making in efforts to address equity. I, for one, am very much surprised and grateful that it's being used as heavily as it is throughout the region. What we're asking is that the update to the 2018 EEAs to match the 2022 destination really should be informed by a review of how the equity emphasis areas and its data is being used in that local effort. So every situation would probably be unique. Data for the 2022 equity emphasis areas, of course, will be available to member jurisdictions on our website and to everyone, while the 2018 equity emphasis areas will also remain accessible to everyone, particularly in the TPB's Regional Transportation Database Clearinghouse, as well as our equity and environmental justice sections of the COG website. And then finally, and important to know is that the TPB's equity emphasis area designation are a regional product customized and unique for our region. And they're not explicitly approved by the Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, or any other federal agency. They are very much used by us to help us meet requirements that they have when it comes to environmental justice analysis. There is no requirement for the Transportation Planning Board member to use the equity emphasis areas in any other federal program and/or grant. My final FAQ slide and a couple questions that we've been answering throughout this presentation, but I'll mention again, is how does the demographic makeup of the region compare today to 5 years ago, and how it may impact the identification of EEAs? So we found the demographic makeup of the region is very similar to when we used the 2012 to 2016 American Community Survey data. Like the region's total population that grew by about 200,000 inhabitants, all historically disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups that are included in the equity emphasis areas increase in total population over the similar time periods. So their respective share within equity emphasis areas and the region as a whole remain relatively steady. And then finally, once again, there is a net 13 tracts identified as equity emphasis areas, but the percent share of all tracts in the region has declined from a little over 28% to a little over 27%. And one could explain why this is. And again, with every 10 years, the United States Census updates tracts for the entire country using those thresholds that we spoke about. And for this region, that added an additional net 108 tracts. So more tracts in the region would likely mean more tracts identified as equity emphasis areas, while still being a similar percent share of all tracts in this region. Before I close out and conclude the presentation, and happy to answer any questions and support any discussion, our next steps after we complete this presentation and outreach when it comes to phase 1, we'll move on to phase 2, which is the analysis of the 2022 update to visualize 2045 to examine disproportionately high and significantly adverse impact on low-income and traditionally disadvantaged racial and ethnic population groups. If that is found to be true, we also would need to look into developing mitigation measures to limit that disproportionate and adverse impact. We expect to present the results of this analysis to the TPB in early to late fall 2022, so later this year. And with that, I will go ahead and put up my closing slide with my contact information and end the slideshow. Chair Sebesky, pleased to pass it back to you and support any questions and discussions.
Thank you so much, Sergio. Such fascinating information. If I might ask, if the interactive link could be emailed to all of us, so it makes it a little bit easier, I know, for me to be able to share with the rest of my board, because I think that they will want to go in and play with the tool some. So thank you again for your presentation. We'll start with questions from the District of Columbia. Okay, how about Maryland?
Right, this is Sakina Khan with the District of Columbia. It's not so much a question, just as a comment. It's really great to see the ongoing work with respect to the equity emphasis areas, and we look forward to the next phase of the analysis and the implications for the District of Columbia. We do use the equity emphasis areas as part of our planning work. It helps us kind of target certain communities and think about the relationship to the land use planning that we're doing, and other opportunities such as linkages to infrastructure and bill. So it's important work, and thank you, TPB, for continuing it.
Great, thank you. No, totally agree. So if there's nothing, let's go to Maryland, and we'll start with Earl Lewis.
Thank you. Fantastic work. Just curious, do you have any interactions in terms of developing your screening tool with the University of Maryland or the Maryland Department of Environment? I know they have an EJ screening tool that they use as well. Just curious about that.
Yeah, I'm assuming and thinking that you're speaking about EPA's environmental EJ screen, which is a national product, a federal product that is used extensively throughout equity and consideration of environmental justice considerations. You know, we very much looked at EJ screen when we first set off on this work, and to be honest, ours is very much intended to be a region-specific version in a lot of ways of EJ screen, in the sense that while they use federal, we use very similar data, ours are very much tailored to the needs for our region versus EJ screen being much used for the entire nation. So that's generally our approach when it comes to EJ screen.
Sure, if I could add, right, thank you, Sergio. So, Earl, in addition to that, in addition to this being very region-specific data as opposed to national averages, right? The other thing that we have done, and Ms. Sabeski earlier was speaking to continuing this very productive, profitable partnership between TPB and COG, the Council of Governments Board has adopted equity emphasis areas into other regional planning efforts, right? Whether it is land use, housing, public health, food, other aspects. As part of that work, we have been adding additional data into the census tracts, which may not always be relevant or useful for analyzing the impacts of the transportation system, but it might be helpful for analyzing other things, whether it is food deserts, access to healthcare, that sort of thing. So we are adding all of the data as we move along. The second thing that we have done, some of this is not in the EPA tool. That's why I'm just trying to identify some additional differences. The additional thing we've been adding is taking the region's roadway safety, particularly the crashes data, and adding that here so that when we do our safety analysis, we are able to overlay it with the equity emphasis areas. So we've been adding other data elements to it. So that's another aspect from which that this data set is different from the EPA's tool.
Gotcha. Because as mentioned by the earlier questioner, commenter, this is becoming more and more important as we look at other transportation initiatives, for instance, like EV recharging infrastructure. And obviously the feds have their Justice 40, there's the EPA tool, and obviously there are others. And, you know, we try to look at multiple screening tools to make sure we don't miss anything. So thank you for your efforts here.
So I have a question to clarify what the online tool does and what it shows.
Mr. Gary, can we let Kelly had her hand raised first? Can we
I'm sorry.
let her ask her question?
I was just curious if it's possible, I haven't played with the map a lot, to have the 2018 data and the 2022 data so that one can see like sort of juxtapositions where things have changed, what's been added, what's been subtracted, if that makes sense.
Sure, I'll circle back with our GIS folks and see what we can do to have that.
Ms. Russell, I think as a technique within the GIS tool, we can do that, but it's probably a very natural curiosity to see how it changed. The only caution is when we see the changes, we also will have to bear in mind that the 2020, the boundary itself could have changed, right? It's not exactly the exact same boundary as before, right? So that's one. The second thing that has happened, and this was part of Sergio's slides, is even if the geographic area was exactly identical, it is possible that with the new data set, the population has changed, right? So the census tracts aim to have about 4,000 people in every track, but it's not exactly 4,000. It ranges from 1,200 to almost 8,000. So in the 2018 set, a particular tract which might be identical in 2022 might have the same geographic shape and area, but the densities might have changed. So I think we just have to keep that in mind.
Thank you for those cautions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And before we move to Virginia, Gary, did you want to ask a question?
I do. Thank you very much. Can you clarify in the product, the GIS layer on your tool, which network you're using? Because when I looked at it, it still had the ops lane section from Old Georgetown Road to Prince George's County in, and I know that's not part of Visualize 2045 now for construction. And so can you please check and see if we're using the latest network? Or if we're using the old network, I would propose you not allow that to be used until it can be properly updated. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Once again, well, it was mostly for one illustrative purpose, so we're not, so the actual analysis itself would use obviously what is approved for the 2022 update for Visualize 2045. In addition, I'll circle back with our GIS folks and the data set that we're using to ensure that we're providing the correct one. So thanks for
that. Thank you very much.
Just if I can add, I know this question keeps coming up. For some reason, there continues to be some confusion on people's part that somehow in the TPB's 2022 officially adopted Visualize 2045, construction of the managed lanes on Maryland portion of the Beltway east of 270 has been included. I've said this before, I will say this again, we've done this in writing. That is not true. The 2022 Visualize 2045 plan does not include managed lanes on the Beltway in Maryland east of I-270. However, the 2018 plan did include that. So our equity emphasis area analysis of 2018 did show that managed lanes would indeed be constructed on Maryland portion of the Beltway. So the tools that we have, if the 2018, if somebody is looking at the 2018 tool, they would see the 2018 network, which did have that. The 2022 updated equity emphasis area will show in the background the 2022 network, which will not show the managed lanes. So I just wanted to clarify.
Thank you, Conti. Casey Kostick from Maryland has her hand up as well.
Thank you. Just briefly, I know this is a federal requirement, but just thinking through, it seems a little backwards when looking at the environmental justice analysis to happen after we adopt the plan. And so I'm just kind of curious what the mitigation steps are if there is an issue that's found. Is that something that then is envisioned as feeding into the next TIP or the next long range plan? How does it help in terms of actually creating the long range plan itself?
Right. So good question. There are a couple of things, right? So certain large projects, particularly projects that require federal approval, that rises up to the level of environmental impact statements, they are required to assess what impacts that they're having and come up with mitigation efforts at a project level, right? So this analysis is when you combine all of the projects, the highway projects, the transit projects, or the non-motorized. Many times lane capacities or other capacities are removed to add capacity to non-motorized modes of travel, right? So we are combining everything. When you combine all of that, what is the combined impact on mobility and accessibility on these two sets of specific population? That's in the federal requirement, right? Are the low-income population groups in the region, or are the racial and ethnic minority population groups in the region experiencing any disbenefits disproportionate to the disbenefits experienced by the other population group? So that is the test. The test is not, are these areas being impacted? Are the impact by this population group disproportionately greater than the impact on the other regions? So that is the test. And with regards to, is this really being backward? There is another way of looking at it. We are trying to assess the impact of a plan, not what assess impact after it is built. I completely agree with you. If you are looking at impacts after it is built, that is way too late. This is a plan. Most of our projects are not built. Many of our projects will not be built for the next 20 plus years. So this is an opportunity for the MPOs that compiles the plans for the next 25 years to say, if we implement all of these projects, what would be the impact? So from that perspective, when we complete this analysis, we will know the answer if there are disproportionate disbenefits experienced by these population groups in these areas. So if to date, we have not had such a finding. And when I say that, I want to acknowledge that the 23 member jurisdictions and their agencies are being mindful of those things, right? Because if each project is conceived with some consideration of inequities and addressing those inequities, when you combine them, it is likely that you will not see any inequities. But we will see, because there are other changes. There are demographic changes, there are population shifts. So, which has nothing to do with the individual project scope, but they are nevertheless changes within the society. That is what this analysis brings to the table, not just the project scope, but all the demographic and population changes happening. So we will definitely see what the results will say, the 2022 plan. And I suppose there's always a first time for everything. If we do end up determining that, hey, look, there is some disproportionate disbenefits experienced here, then that will be a collective discussion we will have to nevertheless take. It's not something that we necessarily say, we will wait for next 4 years. This is the plan. This is the impact. So how are we going to mitigate it? So that would become an important conversation to have. I'm glad you asked that question, Ms. Casting.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I'll move on to Virginia and other agencies. Questions? Okay, great. Thank you again. What a great tool, great presentation. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to move into our notice item. This item for today is to the TPB giving notice of its intent to take action in September. Lynn Erickson on staff will brief us on the proposed amendment to our bylaws. Lynn, please proceed.
Great, thanks. I'm going to give Kim a second to load the memo in case you guys all haven't had a chance. Perfect. Thanks, Kim. All right, so we initiated an update to the TPB bylaws to accurately reflect the virtual options available for TPB to conduct business after our public health emergency ends. So as we started the update, we noticed that, let's just say, these had been written so long ago. So there was a lot that was out of date. So we took the opportunity to update the language to reflect current laws, current practices, including referencing our master funding agreement, which covers invoicing, referencing our recently adopted public participation plan, and also the fact that we have been and will continue to use Robert's Rules of Orders. We also looked at, introduced some additional minor editorial reviews just to bring the bylaws up to the 21st century. So the substantive changes you see in front of you now. So it really focuses on our virtual participation options. So as we understand it, many members of the board have consistently expressed a preference for in-person meetings based on the view that such in-person congregations help build familiarity and better working relationships among better members for our geographically diverse region, many of whom otherwise may have limited opportunities to meet, interact, or generally get to know not only each other, but get to know their viewpoints better. So now we know that you guys don't have a ton of extra time, but the complexities of our policy matters tackled by the board and the general interest of the board to expand the scope and lens of regional transportation planning has periodically led to a need for additional meetings. I mean, we pack in a lot in these 2 hours. So our proposed revisions now state that the TPB shall give preference for in-person meetings over virtual meetings for these reasons. And when an in-person meeting is scheduled, members may attend the meeting virtually on no more than 2 occasions in the year. So the chair may also, as we're doing, propose or upon request from board members, schedule up to 3 all virtual meetings in a year. So what does that mean? All right, this means a member may now be able to participate in up to 5 of the 11 meetings virtually. So what I need you guys to do, logistically, we provided you with 2 versions of the bylaws to review. One that's marked up with changes so you can nitpick and see exactly where we changed the wording, and one that's a clean version so you can read it. It's really not very long. You probably should all just do a refresher read anyway. So what we'd like is you to take a look at these, provide your comments via email to me or Conti by August 26th. That gives you a month to look at it. Our bylaws state that all amendments must be introduced at one meeting and then can be acted on at the next meeting. So we're scheduled to act on these changes at the September meeting. So that concludes my brief presentation. Again, our focus is on the virtual section. We're happy to take questions.
Thank you, Lynn. As we are coming out of this public health emergency, and as someone who started on this board when we only had the choice of really participating in person, the other transportation boards I serve on are all pretty much in person, and they also only give me the option of 2 times a year of participating virtually. I think that it is very helpful. I come from an outer jurisdiction. When I come to these meetings, it's a whole day commitment because of the distance that has to be traveled. So, in respect for everyone's time, I do understand that. But the value of collaboration that I have found in the time I've served, to be able to get to know people in DC and Maryland and how different those jurisdictions operate versus Virginia, as well as even some of my Virginia colleagues that I might not serve on the other transportation boards with, I have found to be extremely valuable. Though I don't know if if it means that we need to have 11 meetings a year in person. So I'm glad that we're looking at this and updating it to what I think many organizations and employers are doing, which is more of a combined model approach. So I guess my question to you, Lynn, is I know we're going to take questions. Is that what we're looking for? This is not something that would also have to be done in September. If there's a lot of question, I want everyone to know that we could do this in October as well. It all is the will of this board, but it is interesting, isn't it, when you haven't looked at your bylaws in a long time and you go in and you're like, wow, a lot of this is way out of date. We've seen that in other places. So at this time, I'm going to open up the questions, and let's start with Maryland. Okay, so I see some. So Casey Kostick, go ahead.
All right, I feel like I've asked a number of things, so I feel bad going first. But I do have a couple of 2 questions. I'll try to be brief. First of all, I share your perspective, Madam Chair, that it is more effective to be in person and great to build those connections. At the same time, I do have some concerns about us requiring people to do that, particularly from outer jurisdictions and people whose primary livelihood is not their elected role, because it does require a significant time commitment, as you said. So I'd love to find maybe something that's a little more allowable for folks to attend virtually if needed. And also for us perhaps to look at the timing of our meetings to allow for maybe an earlier or later day meeting, so it doesn't kind of take up your entire day. My other question is related to the chat in our virtual meetings and whether that is becomes part of the public record and is part of the minutes. I know sometimes there is some substantive information that people post there or questions that are shared there, and I think that should be reflected as well.
On the latter part, Ms. Kostick, whenever there are comments, questions that are part of the general discussion, we do try and reflect what is in the chat. And in the past, you may recall, there were some questions that were asked in the chat that we didn't get into the discussion, and staff followed up with an email to everybody saying, hey, somebody asked this question, here are the responses. So we are doing that. There are lots of other questions that are asked, clarification or on a one-on-one thing. We don't try to go down a blow by blow for everything.
Okay, are you good, Casey? Okay. Neil Harris?
Thank you. I'd like to comment along the same lines as Casey's comment, but taking it a little bit further. One of the goals of this organization is to enable people and encourage people to commute less and work virtually, and yet we're looking at trying to get people to attend meetings in person. I will echo what Chairman Sebeski said about the value of meeting in person, and I would prefer to do that whenever possible, but I don't think we should make that a requirement. Personally living in Gaithersburg, I have a long commute to get in. I work in Herndon these days, several days a week, and that's an extra hour of commuting time each direction. It makes it very challenging. I think we should do our best to accommodate people however they need to be able to work. And again, I think we should follow our own precepts in making sure that people don't overtax our transportation system whenever possible. Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else from Maryland before I move on? I see, Mr. Schneider, I've not forgotten you, but I happen to know you're Virginia. So seeing no other hands in Maryland, since Mr. Schneider has his hand up, we'll go ahead and go to Virginia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Question for staff. The Virginia Freedom of Information Act on this topic is particularly complicated. And I'm wondering if this has been vetted thoroughly with a Virginia government law expert to make sure that the Virginia participants are in full compliance with the applicable law, because I know it may differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Two more questions. Public input. How are we receiving that in the virtual meetings as well as the live meetings? Can someone appear virtually and make their presentation, or does it have to be simply by email? So in each type of meeting, what are the public participation rights? And then the third issue is I would tend to agree with those who want to, again, consistent with applicable law, the maximum degree of flexibility with how people participate, either virtually or in person. Thank you.
Hey, Madam Chair, just FYI, the TPB's attorneys are also engaged. We are currently in a period of review and comments. So all the feedback that we get, like the reminder to make sure that these bylaws remain to be consistent with the Virginia laws, as well as Maryland, as well as DC. That is part of that review, and we'll definitely be making sure that happens this time as well, Mr. Snyder.
Okay. Is there anyone else from Virginia that would like to speak? I don't see hands raised, but that doesn't mean that there's not somebody that I am missing somehow. I know staff is helping me with this too. Okay. How about the District of Columbia? WMATA or other agencies? Okay. Not seeing any other information. Conti, is there anything else to come before the board?
No, other than no meeting in August. Happy summer to all of you. The next meeting will be in September.
Yeah,
and
so
we will, if I could just take a minute to add, the COG leadership, the COG board is going on a retreat like they do every year, and they talk about a whole host of topics, all interrelated, interdependent. Transportation has been figuring considerably over the past few years. And this year, we've been asked to facilitate a discussion on how can the region work to advance electric vehicle deployment in the region. When I say electric vehicle, clean fuel is probably a broader term, but that's part of our climate change mitigation strategy, one of the most effective ones. So it's not simply TPB adopting the strategy. As your staff, we are looking for opportunities to take this to other policy arenas and to help facilitate some thinking and some actions, because not all of the actions can come within the departments of transportation. It would probably require other departments or at a jurisdictional level. So I'm very happy that we have received that opportunity. We'll be talking about it. I'm working with the COGS environmental program staff on this. I hope to come back and report to you all, or the officers who will be attending the retreat. You will have something positive to report, along with other members of the TPB who are also members of COG. So I'm very hopeful that we have only 7 years to get to 2030. So I'm a little bit anxious.
So we have a few minutes, and it looks like Earl Lewis just raised his hand. Maybe he has something he'd like to add. I know we were trying to get you earlier, so if you have anything you would like to add now, you're welcome to do that too. Mr.
Yeah, very briefly. Anything that I can do with the EV study and outlook, let me know. I'd also add that the Maryland Commission on Climate Change Mitigation Work Group has a similar objective to get to an aggressive goal. Instead of 2030, it's 2031. So there's a lot of interest in Maryland to figure out how we can be aggressive, especially with the light duty vehicles where the technology is pretty much proven, even though there's still going to be continual technological innovations there. But just let us know anything we can do to help. We have about 70 people attend the ZVIC meetings every other month. We had about 70 yesterday at our meeting, so a lot going on there.
Thank you, Earl.
Okay. Well, as already been stated, we won't be meeting in August. Our next meeting is September 21st. It will be virtual, just like this one. So I hope everyone has a great summer, and I will look forward to conducting another meeting virtually in September. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you all. Happy summer.
Bye.